There's actually 3 reverb plugins included with Studio One. This one, which is called Mixverb, another one called Room Reverb, and possibly my favorite actually, OpenAIR. We'll discuss the differences between these 3 during this video. But first of all, I just want to have a quick chat about the different ways they can be implemented in Studio One. The most obvious way is to use them as an insert on the channel that we want to affect. In this case, I've got a female vocal here in pink, and you can see that room reverb is inserted there. Okay, let's just pull that up and have a listen.
Of all the things we could have known.
We're just getting a nice amount of reverb there without it being too overpowering. And that's because I've made use of this control, the mix control, which you will find on most plugins these days, okay? And if you're using it as an insert, it's really important to make use of this because this will blend the original dry sound with the reverb sound. Now, if you didn't have a mix control, it would be all reverb and it just wouldn't sound very good. So it's important to make use of that when you're using this as an insert. Now, the other thing I want to make note of is the fact that this effect is currently in mono because the original vocal is in mono. It was recorded with just one microphone. Let's just have a quick listen to it again in solo.
Of all the things we could have known.
But what we can do is change the channel mode for this vocal to a stereo channel so that the effect will be in stereo, even though the original vocal will be in mono. And we do that by going to the track, which is at the top here. And you can see there's a little button, which is a single circle at the moment. If I click on that, it becomes a double circle. And that means the channel mode is now stereo. Have a listen to this vocal now.
Of all the things we could have known.
And it's sounding much wider and sort of more lush to me, to be honest with you, because of that. So if you are using a reverb as an insert, it may be worth doing that if you want to get a nice spread on mono sources like vocals. Now, I've got to tell you, this is not my favorite way of using plugins like this. I much prefer to actually send or use this plugin on a bus. Let's just do that now. Okay, I'll just turn solo off. I'm going to grab that reverb where it's inserted there. I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard and drag it across to this bus here, which is in green next to it. Okay, and then I'm going to do a send. Yeah, I'll just click on the plus button next to sends on the vocal, and I'll find that that bus there, which is called Rev bus. Click on that. So now the vocal is being sent through to this bus. Let's just have a quick listen.
Of all the things we could have known.
Now, I was playing it in the track there, so you can't hear it too clearly, but you will have noticed there's hardly any reverb on there. Let's just solo that, and I'm going to show you why that is. First of all, that mix control again. Whenever you use an effect like this on a bus, you normally want to push this all the way up so that it's all the reverb effect. Okay, that's the first thing you'll want to do. The next thing you'll want to do is then blend them using the fader on that actual bus. So I'm just going to pull it down to 0 at the moment and then gradually push it up as I listen to the vocal.
Of all the things we could have known.
And I've got a nice blend there. Okay, so why am I bothering to do it like this if I'm getting the similar result or the same result? Well, first of all, the fact that it's on a bus means that this reverb can now be shared by many other vocals or even other instruments in my mix. Okay, so I've only got one instance of the plugin. I'm saving on CPU resources on my computer, and of course I've got one place to make adjustments. If I had this as individual plugins on every single vocal track, I'd have to go into each one as I wanted to adjust it later, and it's a real hassle. And the other reason why I do this, and this is just will revolutionize your mixes if you are not already doing this, is I've actually got an EQ plugin on that bus just before, in this case, the reverb. Now, EQing your reverbs really helps you to get rid of the mud that they cause, because all of that low-end information really sort of builds up with a reverb, and your mixes, when this is applied to many tracks, can sound very, very muddy indeed. So you can see if I pull up this EQ that I've done quite a drastic low cut here. Okay, I've got rid of all of that low-end information by using the low cut control on the EQ. Now this helps to tidy it up enormously. So let's just have a quick listen now. I've turned that on.
Of all the things we could have known.
So that vocal's got a much nicer kind of airy feel to it now. Let's just have a quick listening in the context of the mix.
Of all the things we could have known.
That's getting pretty close to the way I like it there. Now, I have inserted that before the reverb plugin. Some people like to do it afterwards, and I can see the sense in that as well. You could want to adjust certain resonances that may stand out because of the reverb plugin, okay? So it's fine to do it either way. I tend to do it before, but you can do it afterwards. Just experiment and see what works best for you. Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. All three of the reverb plugins that you get with Studio One are useful in their own way. Let's start off by taking a look at the most simple of the three. So I guess the advantage of Mixverb is its simplicity. Just a straightforward reverb control. You can just drop it in a channel, start using it right away, and it's not too complex. Let's just have a quick listen to it in its default state.
Of all the things we could have known.
So it just sounds like we've got our singer in a nice sort of small room there, which is kind of nice if you want that kind of effect. But you can get lots of other sounds from this simple reverb. Probably the first control that I would play with would be the size control over here, okay? So let's change this from a pretty small space to a much bigger space and have a listen.
Of all the things we could have known.
Okay, so it's pretty evident what the size control does there. Another really important control, which we're going to see on all of these reverbs, is pre-delay, okay? So pre-delay is just a delay which happens before the reverb effect kicks in, okay? So it leaves an amount of the sound dry at the beginning, depending on the setting that you've done here in terms of the timing. This is handy for keeping things present, okay? So you can still keep your vocal sort of a bit more up front. It's not swamped in reverb all the time, okay? So it's a very handy control there, pre-delay. If I just put it to an extreme, which you probably would never use, then you'll hear what it's doing.
Of all the things we could have known.
Yes, you can hear that massive delay before the reverb is heard, okay? So generally we use that either at 0 or just on just a tiny little amount, okay? And finally, a really important control for this particular plugin is the damping control. So what this is doing is it's attenuating, or I should say sort of reducing, suppressing the higher frequencies the further we turn this up, okay? Now, I have that EQ plugin before this reverb, so I'm just going to quickly switch it off, okay? Let's have a listen to damping, make sure it's sort of a reasonably big reverb. Let's have a listen to the damping all the way down.
Of all the things we could have known.
And let's just turn it pretty much, not quite all the way up, but have a listen here.
Of all the things we could have known.
Now you may want to sort of rewind a bit and listen to that again. You can hear that the lower end frequencies still have quite a long tail, okay? But those higher end frequencies are being suppressed. Now if I turn my EQ back on, which is just off the screen here, then that will have the effect of really reducing the tail of the reverb because there isn't much low frequency information anyway. So have a listen down low.
Of all the things we could have known.
Again.
Of all the things we could have known.
So another way of sort of adjusting the size, if you like, and just giving it a bit of a different character. Okay, so let's just get that back to normal. Now, the other control that we have in the middle here is a gate control. So a gate just gets rid of, was helpful for just getting rid of any low volume information, okay? So we could use it, I guess, to get rid of the tail of a reverb, but it is fairly abrupt. I'll give you an idea. I'll switch it on. And by the way, this is happening on the output stage, okay? So it's not gating the information going into the reverb. This is after reverb's been applied. I'll put the threshold down pretty low and then turn it up.
Of all the things we could have known.
So not much gating going on there. If we turn this up again.
Of all the things we could have known.
You can hear that reverb sort of cutting in and out there, okay? Which is probably not what you want, but you never know, you may want that. We do have a release control as well, which is just going to control the release time of the gate, how long it stays on for. Got to be honest with you, I've probably never used this part of this plugin, but you may find it useful, so it's good to know that it's there. Switch it off now. And finally, on the right-hand side, of course, we've got our mix control, which we know all about because we've discussed it earlier. And then we've got our width control, which has a really nice effect, or a noticeable effect here. So I'll turn it all the way down. We're basically getting a mono effect.
Of all the things we could have known,
And then all the way up.
of all the things we could have known.
Especially if you're listening on headphones or decent studio monitors, you'll really hear a much nicer spread there. The Room Reverb plugin, as its name suggests, creates reverb by modeling the characteristics of a room. We've got lots of fun controls to change that, and it does result in a fantastic sounding room often if that's what you want to do. Now, we can control different dimensions of the room and the type of room in the top right hand corner here. So we've got room type buttons here, anything from a small room, medium room, and a large hall. And then we've got the main control, which is size here, okay? And you can see it's changing the display down here. Let's just have a listen.
Of all the things we could have known.
You can especially hear the tail changing there. We can also change the relative sort of dimensions with the width control here. Yeah, you can see that changing the display there, and the height control. So we'd have a really sort of like tall, narrow room, for example. So that's the first way in which we sort of change this particular effect. Now, the other thing that we can do is adjust the tail. We can modify that. We have a pre-delay for the tail over here. We discussed pre-delay earlier, okay? So that changes sort of when that tail of the reverb sort of kicks in there. We can add a delay there. And we've also got the tail length adjustment here. Let's have a listen to that as we change it.
Of all the things we could have known.
Pretty short, and then, or reasonably short, and then much longer.
Of all the things we could have known.
Yes, okay, that's now getting a bit crazy. And then we have this mix control here, yeah? So this mix control is to mix between the early and late reflections, okay? Just so that you know, so you can adjust that here. Then things get pretty interesting down the bottom here. We have a character section here with some interesting controls. So the first one is population. This is mimicking how many people are in the room, and has most effect on the low end frequencies, okay? So we can sort of go from sort of no people up to many people, okay? So that's what that control is for. Then we have a reflectivity control, which is mimicking or modeling how reflective or how smooth the surfaces are, okay, within the room. So that can have a more of a sort of an echoey effect with hard surfaces, okay. Then we have a dampness control. It's kind of similar to the dampness damper that we saw in the previous plugin, but the idea behind this is mimicking how much humidity is in the air, okay, and this has an effect on the higher end frequencies, okay. So that's what you would use that for. Then we get into this geometry section here, which I think is pretty interesting. This is all about the relative position of the listener to the source of the reverb, okay? So we've got a distance control here, how far away the listener is. We've got an asymmetric or asymmetry control here, which is about the relative position in terms of left and right, okay? We can see all of this changing up here, by the way, as we change these controls. And then we have the plane control, which is about adjusting the height of the listener relative to the source within that room. Okay, all of these have a really sort of, well, some of them have a really subtle effect, but altogether they enable you to create a really convincing room reverb effect, in my opinion. I really love this plugin. Worth playing around with. There's also a bunch of great presets as well. Now, this is all very well if you want to mimic physical characteristics of a room, but not all reverbs are based on that. So OpenAIR is a convolution reverb. These types of reverbs use something called impulse responses to recreate either physical rooms or hardware. Now, in the last plugin, we were sort of modeling physical rooms. This takes a different approach. This uses measurements from physical spaces to recreate them, and then they create these impulse response files that we can use in reverbs like this. But as I say, we can also use them to mimic real hardware. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what we'll do first of all is just go up to the top here and choose one of the presets. I'll just go to halls. Now don't panic if you don't see all of these folders because I've added some of my custom ones here, which I'll tell you about later. But let's go down to halls here. You will have that. I'm in large halls, and we'll just go, for example, for bright. Okay, so I'll select bright and let's have a listen to that.
Of all the things we could get right, we thought each other.
A huge long reverb, yeah. We can actually do things like adjust the length, so we'll change that there.
Of all the things we could get right, we thought each.
And of course, we've got pre-delay, which we can see here, yeah, as we've discussed with the other plugins. We have a little bit of control over the envelope down here, so we can fade the impulse response in and out. We've got controls for that. We can change the relationship between the early and late reflections down here as well. A whole bunch of controls for the envelope there. And then we can do some processing. These three controls here are affecting the stereo image there, and then we've got an EQ in the bottom right hand corner here. So that's the sort of basic controls. But what I really love about this is, first of all, I just love the basic effects. Oftentimes I can just select something, say like that preset that I've selected there, and then just simply use the mix control.
Of all the things we could get right,
get that how I want it, and I'm just kind of done. But one of the cool things is that people have actually sort of made these impulse responses, some of them commercial, but many of them free, to record the responses of really great hardware. So for example, if we go to the top here, ages ago, I got some impulse responses for the very famous Lexicon 480L. If you don't know, this is just a really, really famous reverb unit, okay? So for example, there's a large hall in there, which I really like. Have a listen to that.
Of all the things we could get right, we thought each other had a fight and turn a heart into a stone.
It's one of my favorites in a mix. That just can sound very, very good indeed. Let's just go to another one that I've got in there. This one's called Doubler, so it creates a doubler effect right away.
Of all the things we could get right.
So that's been models, as I say, from sort of famous hardware. Another one, just to quickly show you, which I just picked up recently, was some free impulse responses for the Roland RE201. This is the space echo unit, super famous, and we've got some spring reverb effects in there. Okay, so these types of reverb are not really like physical rooms. Yeah, they've got their own characteristic to them. We'll just choose this spring medium here and have a listen.
Of all the things we could get right, we thought each other had a fight.
So look, a lot of these, if you just go Googling for, free impulse responses, look for a particular model of hardware, and often you can find that, as I say, there's some commercial ones available as well if you want to buy them. I just find this to be, it's just so flexible. I mean, and the different types of reverb you get with this, just amazing that we get this plug-in for free with Studio One. Now, of course, reverb can be used on many different sources, but I've focused on vocals during this video. If you want to find out a lot more about how I actually process vocals in my mixes, take a look at this video right here.